Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 16, the Age of Zoharic Tradition, Book 3, Source and Authority of the Kabalah, from the Doctrine and Literature of the Kabalah by Arthur Edward Waite. 4. The Age of Zoharic Tradition. It must not be supposed that the field of criticism is entirely occupied by a hypothesis of unmixed fraud, or that this hypothesis has always fastened upon the same person. The most favored delinquent is, of course, Moses de Leon, because he is reported to have circulated the Zohar, but occasionally he appears as the tool of other conspirators. Thus, Samuel Cohen maintains that the Zoharic writings were composed by a convocation of converted rabbins, convened for the purpose in a Spanish monastery, employing Moses as their publisher, and thus the church itself seems to figure as an accomplice. Others, like M.H. Landauer, argue that the true author was Abraham ben Samuel Abulafia, while the voice of Dr. Graetz is raised in favor of the school of Abraham ben David of Beaucaire. Abraham ben David of Posquier and Isaac the Blind are also favored names, to whom it is indubitable in any case that Kabbalism owed something of development and of impulse. Meanwhile, this extreme opinion in all its varieties is balanced by counter-views which also denaturalize the literature. It may be suspected, therefore, with reason that on both sides there is an error of enthusiasm. There are the children of intelligence who look to find the secret doctrine of Judea a mere transcript from that of Egypt, or whatever land is for them the wellspring of all truth and all truly sacred knowledge. These remember, for example, that Abraham was in Egypt, and accepting at once the fairy tale attribution of the Book of Formation to the patriarch, conclude that this document is older than the ritual of the dead. It is useless to reason with those whose confidence is not shaken in the face of impossibilities, whose imagination can bridge all gulfs in evidence by fantastic suppositions. On the other hand, there is the crass criticism which rules off a literature by a single stroke of the pen into the region of forgery and imposture, as it rules off all occult psychology into that of imposture or hallucination. It does not matter that this criticism is always in disgrace. It proved Troy Town to be solar mythos till Troy Town was excavated. It undermined, as it believed, the Book of Daniel till fresh archaeological discoveries cast it into the pit which it had dug. It is truly not less stupid, and it is far less engaging than the opposed excess. The importance of the Zohar does not depend so much upon the date of its documents as on the possible claims of its tradition. The collapse of its claim to antiquity, in that respect and this only, will reduce it to the full rank of imposture. It is clear that the speculations, for example, of medieval or later rabbins, if we waive the dishonesty of a false pretension, will have at most some literary, historical, or exegetical interest, but it will differ in kind rather than degree from that which must attach to a tradition which interlinks with the far past. We are therefore more concerned in ascertaining the state in which modern criticism has left the content of the Zohar than the form in which it is presented to us. The early students of the work, who accepted and defended its antiquity, did not make this saving distinction, and in many instances modern hostility does not make it either. Upon the surface of the history of Kabbalistic criticism, the first presumption is, of course, unfavorable to any hypothesis of antiquity, because this would seem to have been admitted in days when scholarship was insufficiently equipped for the determination of such a question. In the light of fuller knowledge, it will be thought that the claim has lapsed, or remains only as a pious belief prevailing among an uncritical minority, a few persons being always found whose mental bias predisposes them to the defense of exploded views. In such a case, however, an indiscriminate rejection is not much less superficial than an uninquiring acquiescence in a non-proven claim. The history of debated questions of this kind teaches another lesson, and the closest approximation to truth is found usually in the mean of extreme views. Now, in the history of Zoharic criticism, we find that the old students not only accepted the claim of the tradition to antiquity, and were disposed to understand the genealogy more or less literally, but that further they regarded the books which contain both as belonging to certain dates and produced by certain writers without much suspicion on the simple authority of the literature. Later scholars, on the other hand, having found something to countenance the modern origin of the documents, have frequently overlooked the possible antiquity of their tradition. The reference to this antiquity as something which deserves to be regarded apart from the date of publication will explain what I mean by the moderate and middle view in which the truth must be sought. If we fail entirely here, we may regard the case as closed. Now, I believe that a careful and unbiased comparison of all the evidence will lead us to conclude that there are elements of old doctrine in the Zohar. Their exact antiquity is, in part, highly speculative, but it is quite sufficient to invest them with considerable interest. Like the Sefer Yetzirah, some of it may even be referable to the period of Esdras. I refer here to the Yetziratic notions concerning the virtue of divine names, for this is also found in the Zohar, as it is abundantly found in the Talmud. A residuum of its teaching concerning angels and demons may be also an inheritance from Babylon. All this, however, is the worthless part of the Zohar, as it is the worthless, if curious, part of Talmudic literature. With regard to the scriptural exegesis, which constitutes so large a portion of it, we shall not offend possibility by supposing that some of it may be a transmission from Talmudic times. If we take the obscure but ample hints and references found in the Talmuds to the existence of a mystic tradition and follow them through the large mystical literature which intervened between those works and the Zohar as we now have it, we shall be led not to the conclusion of the occultist that there was a great body of secret doctrine which became revealed gradually, but that there was a kernel of tradition which was planted in the secret heart of Israel, which many watered and fostered, till the growth at length put forth, not without something of transformation and of suddenness, the strange flower of the Zohar. As regards form, its most ancient part is probably the Book of Concealment, but it is entirely improbable that any conspicuous portion could have existed in writing till after the 6th century, while the growth of most of it is perhaps much later and subsequent to the latest date, which can be ascribed to the Sefer Yetzirah. It is advanced, as we have seen by its defenders, that it is the subject of reference in several texts, both of the Babylonian and Jerusalem Talmud, under the name of the Midrash of Simeon ben Yochai. And the parallels between Talmudic sayings attributed to this rabbi have been exhaustively compared with the Zohar with a view to exhibit their identity. The existence of a work entitled The Mysteries of Simeon ben Yochai before the middle of the 11th century and possibly much earlier is acknowledged by Dr. Graetz. It is therefore reasonable to conclude that early written and oral materials entered into the composition of the work as we now possess it. This is the most that can be urged, and this is sufficient to prove that no one person wrote it out of his own head. It must be confessed, on the other hand, that the legend, which attributes its origin to R. Simeon ben Yochai, seems to have made an unfortunate choice, for this great authority of the Talmud represents a reaction against the mystical tendencies of R. Akiba, and there is some evidence for believing that he did not investigate the hidden meaning of Scripture, but rather its rational principles. He is described by a modern writer as cold, exclusive, and stoical. At the same time, if we accept the existence of a genuine tradition which became incorporated in the Zohar, it is difficult to reject its leading and central figure. If we turn now for a moment to the standpoint of modern occultism, we shall see that so far we have no warrant for connecting the chief cycle of Kabbalistic literature with the high antiquity to which occultists incline. While we leave them once more in full possession of the alleged virtue inherent in divine names, and perhaps with some elements of legend concerning angels and demons, we are forced to take all that remains a considerable distance into the Christian era. But the Zohar, although it embodies the entire content of Kabbalistic doctrine, is not the sole nor the earliest storehouse of that doctrine. And we have next to consider whether the antiquity of the philosophical tradition given in the second book is to be inferred from its points of contact and correspondence with other theosophical systems which have prevailed in the past. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.